You're listening to the Everyday Legends podcast Moment, a snippet from the full show that is dedicated to championing everyday men and supporting you in getting more from life, from love, and the everyday. I'm your host, Mike Campbell, and the aim of this podcast Moment is simple: to pull a bite-sized snippet of punch from the full episode to support you in building rock-solid foundations, legendary integrity, and kick-ass relationships. So let's get into this moment from the show. What also comes to mind from what you're saying there is a story literally in the last podcast episode I did, where Nick was talking about, his local footy club. Like, he made it to becoming a professional footballer. Why? Many reasons. But at the very, very core of it was Barry and Pat down at the local football club who turned up every week, and they did these things, they did this thing, and they set up this thing. And he goes, there's a lot to it, but I would never have got to where I was if it wasn't for Barry and Pat. Mm-hmm. And he didn't have all this money and all this stuff. He lived in a housing commission, but he did this thing that he was very good at, that he loved, and that it impacted all these children. And I'm not me without Barry and Pat. And, Barry and Pat doesn't get the pats on the back, as you said, right? They don't get that. Well, they do maybe later in life, but they do it because there's something in it for them, this being of use, being of service to the community. And to me, it just opens up this whole world of like what is possible for us and where we can make an impact. Maybe you're really fucking good at cooking barbecues, get down and cook a barbecue for people at the football club, whatever it is.
100%. And I love that story. I love that story from Nick, because one of the exercises I give people to do when we talk about this, to try and understand where I'm coming from a JBN point of view, is I go, tell the story of your life without taking any credit for the good stuff that's happened. Attribute everything to your environment, everything to luck. I have a similar story about footy. I was lucky that when I was a junior footballer, our footy club was only like two and a bit blocks away. Nothing to do with me. We lived in a house that was where we had, it was owned by a couple of a pastor and his wife, and we'd used to live next door, and we'd had challenges in our family. There's violence and drugs and alcohol abuse and all those kinds of wonderful things. We're always struggling for cash. There was no cash, and they said, listen, live here for cheap. That's fine. And they were amazing. They let mum live there for like 20 years for like $150 a week rent or something. It was ridiculous. It was amazing. It was that's a blessing. Nothing to do with me. God, I don't know what, that consistency. You don't get that in housing commissions. You don't get that anywhere else. We were just lucky. They went to live at the church. We're not even church people. We didn't even go to church. I'm not a religious person. I was a bigger kid. I had my growth spurt a little bit early. Nothing to do with me. Just lucky. Single mum, 3 kids. If that footy club wasn't within walking distance, I couldn't play footy. If I don't play footy, a million things don't happen. You make a million relationships. You have a million little wins that make you feel good. You get all of this sense of accomplishment. And I can't take credit for that, because it was luck that it was there. And the kicker is that footy club isn't there anymore. So if some kid is in the same circumstance, living in the same street, they can't walk to that club anymore. They miss out on all the things that I got to have. When we prescribe help constantly about what you, Mike, need to do for you, because I only can reflect on my own life about, well, I went to training, I did the hard work, I did the extra laps, I did this, I did this. So my advice is going to be, you do this, you do the extra laps, you do this thing. And when we're constantly giving people advice like that, it's easy to write people off as not doing the right things. It's easy to write people off as not caring enough, not trying enough. But really, if you want to help people, you've got to create environments where these things are possible, instead of putting it on individuals all the time. And one of the reasons,
by the bootstraps, right?
Yeah, you're not. No one's picking them. There is no self-made person. There is no bootstrap person.
The self is crucial, but in part of that ecosystem.
That's right. And if you want to go through life and attribute all your success to yourself, that's fine. But don't try and help people, because you've got no idea. Yeah. There is no just helping people.
It'll be a very simple vanilla message.
Yeah, just do this. I'll just have a gratitude journal. Just to do more training. But when you pay attention to all of, like Nick is going to be looking around going, how do we get more Barry and Pats?
Yeah.
Because I know it's how important there's a Barry and Pat. Like, that's because people who pay attention to the things around them that help understand, fuck, it's not all me. It's absolutely not all me. How do we have more Barry and Pats? How do I support Barry and Pat, who are now not so mobile because they're older, to get to the club because it's worth it? You know, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to pick them up, drop them off, or I'm going to organise the bus, or I'm just going to pay the taxi each week because it matters. Without Barry and Pat, there's no Nick. And it's the same sort of thing. You go, that footy club should be there, but not just the footy club. You should be able to play footy and soccer and basketball and dance and paint and sing and act and whatever makes the best possible opportunities for people. We should try and have them everywhere for everybody all the time. Instead of saying, if you want to make something of yourself, you need to do all of these things. Yeah. And so if you can pay attention to the environment, you can create a better one. And that is how you create better people, not just telling people. Obviously, we can take for granted Nick worked his ass off. You worked your ass off. I've worked my ass off. Yeah. But to take all the credit is disingenuous, and that doesn't lead to good outcomes for help for people.
Yeah, it's a bit naive. As well, really. So what do you see happens then when you take people through this exercise?
I mean, a lot of the time you get this kind of like, wow, that makes so much sense. You know, like, how is that not what happens?
And what about in terms of where they reflect on their lives? So they start to kind of see different things?
It's very difficult if you've never done it.
Yeah.
That's another challenge. It's hard to backwards because your memory is hazy. You've only got flags planted. So the example I always give, I live near a big park in Melbourne. It's called Albert Park. There's lots of trees. So if we go for a walk, you'll remember that we walked past heaps of trees. You'll be like, yeah, Albert Park, they got the trees, right? I'm not a plant person. I don't know much about plants at all. But if you walk with someone who goes, oh, that's an oak tree. I don't even know if there's an oak tree, but that's an oak tree. And you look at it and you go, oh, it's an oak tree. And they go, yeah, like you can see the leaf shape. It's really good being near water. This sandy soil is really good or whatever, blah, 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 blah. And you go, okay. So now you see trees plus oak trees. You can spot the oak trees. Because you learned about it, because your attention was drawn to it, because you've been taught about it. Then you might learn about palm trees and gum trees and different gum trees and whatever. So your walk the first time was just trees. But by 10 years later, you're like, oh, there's these gum trees and there's these shrubs. And then you learn how they work near each other and what that might mean about the soil and why, you can tell whether they're healthy or not. Now, I could take you around Albert Park one time and then you could spend your life learning about trees. And if I said, reflect on the trees in Albert Park, because you didn't know at the time how to recognize trees, you can't remember what the trees are. You can't go back and insert into your brain, there's oaks and there's palms. Maybe you remember the palms because they're pretty standout down there. But I don't remember that. I can't remember if they were eucalyptus trees. You didn't know at the time to recognize them, and it's very difficult to recognize them in your old memory. Which is why it's so important to teach people from a young age and at the beginning and constantly show them, these are things that are happening that you're not responsible for, that you're the beneficiary of, which is great, and we want you to be the beneficiary of it. You are still doing the work, absolutely, but here's some things that aren't. And then you can reflect back and go, oh, yeah, I wasn't responsible for that. Because, they're oak tree, they're the big oak tree at Albert Park, I remember, because it was pointed out to you. So it's important that we point it out to people, because otherwise we've got to sort of go through step by step and go, actually, this tree is in Albert Park. You kind of vaguely remember the scene. This one's an oak, and you go, of course, there is a massive oak tree there.
Yeah.
And in practice, that looks like saying things like, your parents were literate. And they go, yeah. You go, not everyone has literate parents. Not everyone has books in their house. Not everyone gets taught to read before they get to school. And they go, oh. And you go, yeah, oh. So you start at 5 miles ahead of this kid at 5. And they go, oh, okay. If I just said, think about the stuff that you had that other people don't have, you don't know what you don't know. You go, I don't know. I didn't have a Game Boy when I was a kid, and Pete did. Mate, you had books in your house. Oh, yeah. Your mum was an accountant and your dad was a lawyer. So you knew
it's
what
easy,
an accountant
it's easy
and a
to
lawyer
see perhaps what we didn't have, because as you say, there's often memories attached to those things.
Yeah, right? Everyone remembers the opportunities they didn't have. People rarely remember the opportunities they did have.
Yeah, and I think that's the word that I'm getting through all of that. As you say, even if you're pointing things out to a child now, simply to allow them to see the opportunities.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. And that's also something that's clearly coming through with what you're, doing in general, is this kind of equality of opportunity.
And planting those flags, because
seeing a different perspective, right?
And being if you plant the flags, you can go back and reflect better. Like when I was a turd when I was a teenager, punching on at home with your parents and whatever. And they say things to you and you go, you're an idiot, that's wrong, get stuffed, rah, rah. And then you get older and you reflect back and you go, and I've done this before. I've done this with my mum and I said, look, I'm sorry. I said that was wrong. And no, you're clueless. You got no idea. And you were right. That was the case. And this is what's happened. And so I apologize for saying you've got no idea. At the time, I didn't know. If you hadn't told me, I wouldn't have reflected on our argument later and gone, like 10 years later and gone, oh, actually, you were right. But because you planted that flag and I remembered it, I could come back to that as an adult. And so not demanding that everyone understands it. You can point this stuff out and then go, okay, you're not going to get it right now. You need a bit of perspective. But one day you'll have that perspective and I've pointed out that tree to you and you'll go, oh, okay, it's relevant now. I get it. Yeah. I can associate it with more stuff and now I get it. But if I don't do it now, you won't be able to remember backwards. So it's not always about having people understand 100% the moment you tell them. Sometimes it's just about dropping those flags into people's consciousness so they can go, oh, yeah, okay, cool, that's a thing later on. But again, it takes a patience. It takes a 20-year outlook. It takes not having a win.
There's a long-term view here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You have been listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, Moments, a short snippet from the show that is dedicated to championing everyday men and supporting you and getting more from life, love, and the everyday. If you have enjoyed this moment, then the next logical step is to check out the full episode if you haven't. And if you think that you have someone in your life, a man that could benefit from or will enjoy this moment, then pass it on to him. As always, if you like this podcast, then please click subscribe, click download first, all those things that supports us and this podcast getting in front of more men like you. I've been your host, Mike Campbell. Remember, keep building those rock solid foundations, build that legendary integrity, and keep creating those kick-ass relationships.